The snow never really stopped in Barrow, Alaska. It drifted endlessly, clinging to roofs, piling against doors, and whispering across the frozen streets like ghostly fingers reaching for what was left of the town. A year had passed since the blood-soaked nightmare that scarred Barrow forever, yet silence had not returned. Silence, the kind that heals, had abandoned this place. The survivors tried to rebuild, but the land itself carried a memory, as if the permafrost below their boots still pulsed with the screams of the dead. Those who dared to stay spoke of hearing scratching on windows at night, though no one was there. Others swore that sometimes, under the pale moonlight, they could see shadows moving across the snow that never left footprints. Stella Olson lived with that silence every night. Her husband, Eben, had given his life to save what remained of Barrow, injecting himself with the infection and burning with the last of his humanity to protect her. She had watched him fade into ash as the first rays of the sun ended that month of hell. She thought the sun had ended the vampires too. But grief was a cruel deceiver, and Stella began to understand that evil wasn't so easily erased. On this night, with the temperature sinking to 40 below and the wind biting at her cracked lips, Stella stood outside the old sheriff's station. Her breath puffed out in pale clouds, each exhale carrying the weight of memory. Inside, the building smelled of dust, gasoline, and something faintly metallic that made her skin crawl. She had come to gather files, old reports, anything that might explain the nightmares still plaguing her. She told herself it was research. Deep down, she knew it was something else, fear gnawing her from the inside, begging for proof she wasn't losing her mind. The door creaked behind her. A voice, low and nervous, slipped through. "You shouldn't be here this late." It was Jake, one of the younger survivors who had stubbornly refused to leave Barrow. His eyes darted around the shadows like a rabbit expecting the hawk. "You know what night it is, don't you?" he whispered. Stella froze. Of course she knew. Tonight was the first day of the new month-long polar night. 30 more days of pure, unbroken darkness. The sun had already set for the last time until midwinter ended. The sky above stretched endless and black, with no promise of dawn. "They're gone," Stella said firmly, though her voice cracked on the word gone. "The sun destroyed them. Every last one." Jake shook his head, his lips trembling as though the cold had invaded his bones. "You didn't hear it, did you? Last night, out by the ice roads, I heard them. That sound. That shrieking. Just like before." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to laugh at him, tell him it was the wind cutting across the ridges. But the truth was uglier, she had heard something too. A low moan beneath the storm, like 1,000 voices calling from the black horizon. The two of them stood in silence, only the howl of the wind filling the spaces between. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the shadows of the town, a noise echoed, wet, animalistic, sharp. A sound Stella had prayed she'd never hear again. A scream. Not the kind of scream that belonged to drunken fights or accidents. This one was ripped from the lungs of someone being devoured. It rose, cut off sharply, then left nothing but the hollow emptiness of the dark. Stella's body went cold. Jake took a step back toward the door, his breath quick and shallow. "They're back," he whispered, the words barely forming through chattering teeth. Stella's chest tightened, her pulse hammering in her throat. She remembered their faces, the elongated jaws, the razor teeth, the black eyes that reflected no soul. They weren't romantic monsters or cursed wanderers, they were predators, designed to strip flesh from bone and drink until there was nothing left. The town was a cage again, only this time there were fewer survivors and no one prepared. She swallowed the terror pressing against her ribs. "We have to find the others," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "We have to get everyone together. If they're here, if Marlowe's brood is back." Jake shook his head violently. "Marlowe's dead. You saw him. I saw him. They ripped him apart. How could he?" The sound came again. This time closer. Not a scream. A laugh. Guttural, rasping, thick with hunger. It crawled through the streets like smoke. Jake's face drained of color. We're already too late. From the alley behind the sheriff's station, a shape moved. A tall, crooked silhouette, hunched against the wind. The stench of rot carried before it. A flash of pale skin and teeth caught the moonlight. Then another figure appeared. And another. The darkness had returned. And this time, it wasn't going to end at sunrise. The air froze in Stella's lungs as she watched the shadows crawl into shape. The figures stepped forward, pale bodies almost glowing in the moonlight. Their mouths opened wide, and that inhuman clicking sound began, the sound she remembered from before, the sound of predators announcing the hunt. Jake stumbled back, bumping into the wooden wall of the station. His breath fogged violently as panic clawed its way up his throat. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It can't be real. They're dead. They're all dead." The first vampire lunged into the light. Its face was stretched, skin blistered and cracked from the sun that had once seared it. But it still moved with terrifying speed, dragging long fingers tipped with black claws across the snow. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth slick with saliva. "Inside!" Stella hissed, yanking Jake by the arm. They slammed the sheriff's station door shut and dragged the heavy filing cabinet in front of it. The wood rattled instantly under a pounding force, the claws screeching as they tore against the frame. Jake dropped to his knees, pressing his hands to his ears as the shrieks multiplied outside. Stella crouched beside him, her chest heaving, her pulse hammering so loudly she feared it would give them away. She remembered Eben's voice, calm but sharp, "They're not like us. They don't reason. They don't stop. They just feed." The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against the walls, thick, suffocating. Then came the sound of dragging. Something being pulled across the snow. Stella forced herself to stand and peek through the cracked blinds. Her breath caught. A woman was being dragged into the street by her hair. Stella recognized her, Martha Kelly, one of the few who had stayed after the massacre. Martha's face was twisted in horror, her hands clawing at the ice as two vampires pulled her toward the center of the street. Blood smeared across the snow in long red streaks. One of them pinned her down, its claws sunk deep into her shoulders. The other crouched over her stomach, staring into her eyes with that black, endless gaze. Then, with a swift motion, it tore her open. The scream that left her lips echoed through the frozen town before collapsing into choking silence. Jake turned away, gagging, tears streaming down his cheeks. Stella pressed her hand to the glass, the cold biting into her skin. She wanted to look away. She couldn't. She saw the creatures bury their faces into Martha's body, drinking greedily, pulling strips of flesh away with wet tearing sounds. Her body shook with fury and terror. She thought of Eben again, how he'd turned, how he'd fought, how he'd burned with the sun. All of it was supposed to mean something. A sacrifice that ended this horror. But the streets were red again. The nightmare was repeating. "They're back for all of us," Stella whispered, her voice hollow. Jake sobbed, his hands pressed to his face. "We can't fight them. We're dead already." "No," she snapped, the fire in her voice surprising even herself. "We survived once. We'll survive again. But not if we sit here waiting for them to tear through that door." The sound outside changed. More footsteps. More clicking. The vampires had finished their feast, and now their attention shifted. Their heads jerked unnaturally, sniffing the air, listening. Stella's stomach dropped, they were hunting. Not randomly. They were organized. She pulled Jake to his feet. "We need to get to the generator building. If they cut the power, this whole town will be theirs again. Total darkness." Jake's eyes darted toward the barricaded door. How? They'll hear us. They'll see us. They already know we're here, Stella said grimly. The filing cabinet rattled again as claws scraped against the wood. A guttural laugh followed, low and mocking, as if the creatures understood every word. Stella's hand tightened around the shotgun leaning in the corner of the office. The metal was freezing against her skin, but the weight was grounding. She pumped the chamber with a sharp clack. Jake flinched at the sound, but his eyes held a flicker of hope. The pounding returned, harder this time. The door splintered at the edges, jagged cracks forming where the claws pierced through. Blackened fingers curled inside, reaching. Stella raised the shotgun. Her voice was steady now. When they break through, you don't hesitate. You don't think. You shoot until they stop moving. Understand? Jake nodded shakily, gripping the pistol from the desk drawer like it was the only thing keeping him alive. The first panel of wood snapped, exploding inward in a spray of splinters. A face pushed through, snarling, its mouth wide enough to split its jaw. Stella's finger tightened on the trigger. The darkness had claimed Barrow again, and the first blood had already been spilled. The shotgun blast tore through the night. The first vampire's head snapped back, black blood spraying against the sheriff's station walls as it collapsed half inside, half out, twitching like a broken animal. But the silence that followed was worse. Because silence in Barrow no longer meant safety. It meant waiting. Watching. Listening. The others outside shrieked in unison, the sound rattling the windows as though the glass would shatter under their fury. Then the noise stopped, cut off clean, like a throat slit mid-scream. Stella felt her chest tighten. The pack was adapting. They remembered what a gunshot meant. They're regrouping, she whispered, sweat cold on her forehead. Jake stood rigid, the pistol shaking in his hands. His pupils were blown wide, his lips quivering. We can't fight them, Stella. There's too many. We should have left when we had the chance. Everyone who stayed, everyone's dead. Stella wanted to shout at him, to snap the cowardice from his bones, but she bit her tongue. Fear was rational here. Fear kept you alive, if it didn't consume you. She leaned close, her breath misting against his cheek. Listen to me. If we give up now, we're already corpses. The only chance we have is to move before they surround us. The building creaked under shifting weight. A thump echoed above them, followed by a dragging scrape. Stella's blood ran cold. They weren't just at the door. They were on the roof. Jake's knees buckled. Oh, God. They're everywhere. A crash split the air as claws burst through the ceiling tiles, scattering insulation like falling snow. A pale arm thrust downward, fingers twitching hungrily. The hand swiped the air inches from Jake's face. He screamed, firing blindly upward. The pistol barked, wood splintered, but the vampire didn't retreat. It howled, tearing wider holes, trying to force its body through. Out the back. Stella roared. They shoved through the narrow hallway, their boots pounding against the frozen floor. The emergency exit groaned as Stella rammed it open, the hinges whining in protest. The night greeted them with a blast of Arctic wind and an endless expanse of black. The street lay empty, but the snow told another story. Long drag marks stained with blood carved trails across the ice. Human footprints ended suddenly, replaced by clawed gouges. Stella's stomach churned. Martha hadn't been the only one taken. Keep moving, Stella hissed, shoving Jake forward. They sprinted across the open ground toward the generator building. The structure loomed ahead, its corrugated walls rattling in the storm. If the vampires severed the power, the survivors would be swallowed whole in darkness, and darkness was their domain. Behind them, the clicking started again. Dozens of voices. Fast. Closer. Stella gritted her teeth, lungs burning as the cold tore at her throat. She shoved Jake ahead, her every instinct screaming at her to look back, to see how many were chasing. She didn't dare. She knew what she'd see: a tide of white faces, jaws unhinged, black eyes fixed on her throat. They burst through the generator's steel door, slamming it shut. Jake collapsed against the wall, wheezing. Stella scanned the interior. The room vibrated with the hum of machinery, the smell of oil thick in the air. For now, the lights flickered steady. The generator still lived. But they weren't alone. In the far corner, crouched behind a bank of pipes, a figure stirred. The click of a shotgun echoed. "Don't move," a gravelly voice commanded. Stella raised her hands slowly. Relief spread through her chest as the figure stepped into view. It was Carter, the town's mechanic, his face gaunt, eyes hollow but alive. He lowered the barrel as recognition settled in. "Christ, Stella," he muttered, his voice raw. "I thought you were one of them." She exhaled, the tension in her spine loosening only slightly. "They're back, Carter. They've already taken Martha. Maybe more." His jaw tightened. He glanced toward the steel door as scratching sounds began to crawl along its surface. The metal vibrated under the pressure of claws. "They never left," Carter said, his voice low. "You think the sun burned them all?" "No. They burrowed deep into the ice. Waiting. Healing. And now," he shook his head, despair etched into his features. "Now they're hungry." Jake whimpered, curling into himself, rocking back and forth. Stella's eyes narrowed. She could feel it too, the shift. The vampires weren't just animals. They were coordinated, patient. Smarter. The door rattled violently. A crack snaked across the steel as the creatures rammed it. The shrieks outside rose into a chorus, a storm of hunger battering against metal walls. Stella clenched her jaw, gripping her shotgun. "We make our stand here. If the power goes out, this whole town dies. Eben bought us time last year. We can't waste it." Carter met her eyes. There was no courage there, only grim acceptance. "Then we bleed tonight." The steel began to buckle. Shadows slid through the cracks. The first black claw curled inside, dripping blood. The gathering shadows were coming. And this time, Barrow had no dawn to pray for. The steel door screamed as claws raked it, gouging deep grooves that sparked in the flickering light. Each impact rattled the generator room, the whole building trembling like it was alive and afraid. Stella pressed her back against the control panel, shotgun raised, every muscle coiled. Jake crouched beside the fuel tanks, his pistol clutched in both shaking hands. Carter knelt at the breaker switches, sweat dripping down his temple despite the cold. "They'll tear through any minute," Carter muttered. His voice cracked with exhaustion and certainty. "That door won't hold." The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied. Stella's stomach dropped. That wasn't the generator failing. That was them. The vampires weren't just brute force, they were learning. Testing. Probing. A laugh rolled through the night outside, guttural and wet, echoing through the steel as though the walls themselves carried it. Jake whimpered. Stella felt it in her chest, like claws dragging across her ribs from the inside. "They're playing with us," she whispered. The door bent inward suddenly, the center buckling as if some massive weight pressed against it. Claws slipped through the widening gap, screeching as they scraped steel. Black eyes peered inside, unblinking, hungry. "Now!" Stella roared. Carter pulled the lever. The room plunged into emergency red light as the auxiliary floodlamps outside blazed to life. Through the narrow windows, Stella saw the street erupt in crimson. Figures froze mid-step, their skin shining slick and pale under the light. Dozens of them, their faces twisting as they hissed in unison. For a second, she let herself breathe. The flood lamps wouldn't kill them, but they hated the light. It bought time. The vampires scattered into the shadows, some retreating to the rooftops, others crouching low, eyes glowing in the red haze like predators circling a fire. The scratching on the door stopped. Stella lowered her shotgun slightly, her chest heaving. "We hold here until sunrise." But even as the words left her lips, the truth hit her like ice. There would be no sunrise. Not for 30 endless days. Jake's laugh came out high-pitched, hysterical. 30 nights. 30 nights of this. "We can't, there's no way, we're already dead." He dropped the pistol, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't grip it anymore. Stella grabbed him by the collar, dragging his face close to hers. Her voice was sharp, venomous. "Get a grip, Jake. Eben didn't die so we could curl up and quit. You want to die screaming in the snow? Then walk outside. Otherwise, pick up that gun." Tears streaked his face, but he bent down, fumbling the pistol back into his hands. From the window, Carter's eyes narrowed. "They're not leaving. Look at them." Stella followed his gaze. The vampires hadn't disappeared into the storm. They stood just beyond the glow of the flood lamps, pacing, circling. Their bodies twitched with impatience, heads jerking in unnatural spasms. They weren't retreating. They were waiting. The door thudded again, not from claws this time, but something heavier. A slow, deliberate pounding. 3 times. Boom. 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 Then silence. Stella's throat went dry. It wasn't an attack. It was a message. Carter's face drained of color. "That's not Marlowe's pack out there. This is worse. They've got a new leader." The pounding came again, louder, shaking dust from the ceiling. A voice followed, deep, guttural, layered with something ancient. The words weren't human, but the intent was clear. A command. The pack howled in response, the sound splitting the night. "They're organized," Stella muttered, her grip tightening on the shotgun. "Smarter than before." As if to prove her point, the generator sputtered. Stella's heart skipped. She ran to the gauges. The fuel pressure needle trembled violently. "They cut the line," Carter hissed. His hands flew across the valves, trying to stabilize the system. "They're not just hunting us, they're starving us out." The flood lamps flickered, dimmed, then blazed weakly again. The red light outside thinned, shadows thickening as the vampires edged closer. Jake pressed against the wall, rocking back and forth. "We're trapped. Oh God, we're trapped." Stella's mind spun. The generator wouldn't last. The vampires knew it. When the lights died, so would they. A crash erupted from the back of the building. Glass shattered. The sound of metal tearing filled the air. They weren't waiting anymore. They were coming in from every side. Stella aimed her shotgun at the darkened hallway just as a shape lunged through, its jaw unhinged, eyes wide with bloodlust. She fired, the blast lit the room, spraying black gore across the pipes. Another one followed, shrieking, clawing its way over the corpse. The red light flickered again, weaker this time. Shadows stretched long across the walls. "They're bleeding us dry," Carter shouted over the noise. "When the lights go." The lamps above sputtered once more, then half of them went dark. The vampires screamed with delight, pouring into the building. There was no escape. Not anymore. The generator room dissolved into chaos. The last of the red lamps sputtered and died, leaving only the faint glow of emergency bulbs. Shadows swallowed the corners. The vampires surged forward, a flood of pale bodies tearing through steel and glass like paper. Stella fired again and again, the shotgun pounding her shoulder until it felt bruised raw. Black blood sprayed across the walls, sizzling where it touched hot pipes. The creatures screamed, thrashing, but more poured in, their claws scraping concrete, their teeth snapping at the air. Jake's pistol cracked wildly, his aim shaking, bullets ricocheting off walls. One vampire leapt at him, jaws wide. Carter swung a wrench with all his weight, the sickening crunch of bone splitting echoing in the din. The creature dropped, twitching, its skull caved in. Out! Now! Stella screamed, grabbing Jake by the back of his coat. Carter followed, wrench dripping black gore. They barreled through the side door, stumbling into the frozen streets. The night greeted them with silence, but not emptiness. Shapes shifted on the rooftops, crouched low, eyes glowing. Dozens. Hundreds. The pack surrounded them. Jake froze, his pistol dangling uselessly. "We're dead," he whispered. "We're already dead." Stella forced her breath steady, scanning the shadows. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were holding back. Waiting. Then the crowd parted. A figure stepped forward, tall and impossibly thin, its movements deliberate, regal almost. Its face was long, stretched, with scars crossing its jaw like crude stitches. Its mouth peeled open wider than the others, teeth gleaming wet under the moonlight. Its eyes were pits of black, deeper than night, but behind them there was thought. Calculation. The shrieking stopped. Every vampire fell silent, bowing their heads. Carter's whisper cracked in his throat. "That's not Marlowe." The figure tilted its head, studying them. Then it spoke. Not human words, but something older, wetter, guttural. The pack shuddered at the sound, as if the language itself sank into their bones. Stella's skin prickled. She didn't understand, but she knew. This was their new leader. Their alpha. The creature's mouth closed slowly, the faint smear of a grin twisting its face. Then, in broken English, it rasped a single word. "Run." The pack erupted in laughter, shrill, hysterical, echoing through the icy streets. Stella's blood froze. They weren't predators in a frenzy anymore. They were hunters playing a game. "Move," she shouted, yanking Jake and Carter down an alley. Their boots crunched through the snow, lungs burning as they sprinted. The pack followed, not rushing, not desperate. Just gliding from roof to roof, keeping pace, clicking their teeth, their laughter rising and falling like a cruel orchestra. Every shadow seemed alive. Every doorway whispered with movement. Barrow itself had become a hunting ground. They stumbled into an old grocery store, its windows shattered. Shelves bare and overturned. Stella slammed the door behind them, pressing her weight against it. Carter shoved a toppled refrigerator into place, metal screeching against tile. Inside, the silence was crushing. The hum of the generator was gone, leaving only the wheeze of their breaths and the faint groan of the building settling under the cold. Jake collapsed, sobbing into his hands. "We can't fight that. Did you see him? He wasn't like the others." He spoke. Stella crouched beside him, grabbing his face between her hands. "Get it through your head, Jake. He's worse than the others. Smarter. If we break down now, he wins. We need to think." Her words were firm, but her hands trembled. She had seen it too, that grin, that word, the way the entire pack bent to his will. This wasn't a feeding frenzy anymore. This was war. Carter leaned against the wall, his wrench hanging loose at his side. His eyes were hollow. "We don't stand a chance. Not against that." Stella swallowed the lump in her throat. She thought of Eben again, his sacrifice, his fire, his final scream as the sun burned him to ash. His death had meant something. Hadn't it? Her voice was quiet, but fierce. "If we don't fight, then Eben died for nothing. We hold on. We hurt them however we can. We make them bleed." Outside, the laughter swelled again. A claw dragged slowly across the glass, screeching like nails on bone. The sound circled the building, joined by others, dozens of claws scratching, teasing, taunting. The Alpha's voice rose above it all, low, deliberate, almost gentle. The words were foreign, but the tone was unmistakable. A promise. They weren't going to kill quickly. They were going to savor it. Stella tightened her grip on the shotgun. Her heart thundered, but her resolve hardened. If this was their game, she would play it. But she knew, deep down, that the new Alpha was already winning. The scratching never stopped. It moved around the grocery store like a storm circling prey, claws dragging across the glass, across the metal, across the walls themselves. Sometimes it was a single scrape. Other times, a chorus of shrieks that shook the building to its foundations. They weren't breaking in. Not yet. They were waiting. Stella paced the aisle, shotgun clutched tight, her nerves frayed to splinters. The faint flicker of emergency lights cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, throwing long shadows across the toppled shelves. Cans and broken bottles littered the floor, crunching under her boots. Jake sat curled in a corner, muttering under his breath, his pistol forgotten in his lap. Carter crouched by the boarded windows, peering through the cracks. His breath fogged against the wood as he whispered, "They're just standing there. Not moving. Just, staring." Stella froze. "How many?" Carter turned slowly, his face pale. "All of them." The pack filled the street outside, motionless, lined shoulder to shoulder. Pale bodies stretching as far as he could see. Their eyes glowed faintly, unblinking, locked on the store. It was as though the entire town had come alive with predators. Jake's muttering grew louder. "They're waiting for us to starve. That's it. They'll never leave. They'll bleed us dry, like rats in a trap." He wasn't wrong. Stella's stomach twisted. There was no food here, not enough fuel for fire, no power. Just a coffin with shelves. And then, as if summoned by their despair, the Alpha appeared. He stepped into view, tall and skeletal, the scars across his jaw glistening in the moonlight. The pack fell silent at his arrival, bowing their heads. He lifted one long arm and gestured toward the store. The vampires parted. And from the shadows, they dragged survivors. Stella's breath hitched. 4 people. Familiar faces, 2 teenagers who had refused to leave town after last year's massacre, and an older couple she thought had gone south to Anchorage. They were alive, trembling, their eyes wide with frozen terror. The pack shoved them into the snow in front of the grocery store. The teenagers clung to each other, sobbing. The older man tried to shield his wife, but claws dug into his back, forcing him down. The Alpha tilted his head, studying Stella through the cracked glass. His grin widened slowly. Then he raised his hand. The first teenager was lifted by the hair, her scream piercing the night. The vampire holding her looked to the Alpha like a dog awaiting command. The Alpha lowered his hand. And in one motion, her throat was torn open. Blood sprayed across the snow, steaming in the cold. The pack erupted in shrieks of delight, falling on her body, tearing it to pieces before her brother's eyes. The boy screamed, thrashing, but claws pinned him. His cries echoed through the night until they were cut short by the sound of bones snapping. Stella slammed her fist against the wall. "Stop! Stop it," she screamed, though she knew her voice couldn't reach them. The Alpha turned his gaze to the store, tilting his head like he understood every word. His grin never faded. Then he gestured again. The older couple was dragged closer. The man fought, punching, clawing, his cries raw with fury. But the vampires held him as though he were nothing. The woman begged, her voice cracking, promising anything, tears freezing to her face. Stella's body shook as she watched. The Alpha raised his arm again. "No!" Carter shouted, slamming his palm against the boarded window. His voice cracked, breaking with rage. "Kill me instead, you bastard." The Alpha's black eyes flicked to Carter. He froze, realizing what he'd done. And the Alpha smiled wider. He lowered his arm, not at the couple. At the store. The pack roared in unison, pounding their claws against the walls. The building shook, boards splintering, glass cracking. The survivors outside were forgotten, left weeping in the snow. The vampires didn't want them anymore. They wanted Stella, Jake, and Carter. The culling had begun. Inside, Jake screamed, covering his ears, rocking back and forth. "They'll tear us apart. They'll." Stella grabbed him, her nails digging into his coat. Her voice was a low growl. "Then we don't wait. We move. Now." Carter's wrench trembled in his grip. "Move where? There's nowhere left." Stella's eyes burned with fire. "Then we make somewhere. We don't give them the satisfaction of watching us break." The walls groaned. Claws tore through boards. A pale hand burst inside, twitching hungrily. The Alpha's voice rose outside, low and guttural, rolling like thunder. It wasn't a scream. It was a sermon. A language of hunger and dominion, calling his children to feast. Stella's shotgun trembled in her hands. They were out of time. The walls couldn't hold. Every slam of claws against wood shook the grocery store like an earthquake. Splinters rained down. Boards cracked, metal groaned, and snow hissed through widening gaps. The survivors' prison had become a coffin, its lid about to be ripped open. Jake was sobbing uncontrollably, curled on the floor. Carter had pressed himself against the wall, wrench raised in shaking hands, his eyes darting wildly between each cracking board. Stella stood in the aisle, shotgun aimed at the window, her body rigid, her face pale but burning with defiance. Then the first body fell through. A vampire burst in, head first, jaws gnashing, shrieking as it clawed for purchase. Stella didn't hesitate, she pulled the trigger. The blast echoed like thunder. The creature's skull exploded, painting the shelves with gore. The others outside howled in fury. But more poured in. Pale hands thrust through every opening, tearing away wood and glass, creating jagged holes wide enough to climb through. One by one, the monsters forced themselves inside, shrieking, hissing, their black eyes reflecting hunger. "Move!" Stella screamed. She fired again, then again, reloading so fast her fingers bled. Carter swung his wrench into one's temple, cracking bone, roaring in terror as blood sprayed his face. Jake only screamed. Stella grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet, dragging him down the aisle. "Get up or you're dead," she shouted, shoving him toward the back exit. But the vampires cut them off. 3 dropped from the ceiling, limbs spider-like, landing on all fours. They shrieked and lunged. Carter smashed one in the mouth, but claws ripped across his arm, blood spraying hot. He staggered, gasping, his eyes wide with horror as another pinned him. "No!" Stella fired point blank, but more swarmed him. Carter's scream tore through the air as his body was dragged down, ripped apart in a frenzy of teeth and claws. Blood sprayed across the aisle, painting the white tiles crimson. Stella pulled Jake toward the back door, her chest heaving, but she felt the shift before she saw it. Silence. The vampires froze. Every one of them. And then the Alpha entered. The tall, scarred figure stepped through the broken wall with impossible grace, his body glistening with frost and blood. His black eyes locked on Stella. The pack parted for him, bowing their heads. His jaw stretched into a grin too wide for his face, teeth glistening. He raised one hand. The pack retreated to the walls, circling the survivors like predators awaiting command. Only the Alpha moved forward, step by slow step, his gaze never leaving Stella's. Jake whimpered, clutching her arm. He's here for us. Just us. Stella's grip on her shotgun trembled. Then we make him bleed. The Alpha tilted his head, as if amused. Then, with a sudden lunge, he was on her. Stella fired. The blast tore across his shoulder, blowing chunks of flesh away. He barely flinched. His claws slashed, knocking the shotgun from her hands, sending it skittering across the floor. He grabbed her throat, lifting her off the ground. His face hovered inches from hers, his breath cold and reeking of death. Her vision blurred as his claws tightened. Black spots swam across her sight. She kicked and clawed, but he was too strong. Then Jake screamed. He hurled himself at the Alpha with a jagged piece of wood, stabbing it into the vampire's side. The Alpha roared, dropping Stella to the ground. He swatted Jake aside like a ragdoll, sending him crashing into the shelves with a sickening crack. Jake! Stella rasped, crawling toward him. His chest rose shallowly, blood dribbling from his mouth. The Alpha turned back to her. His grin returned. Stella's fingers brushed the shotgun. She wrapped her hands around it, rolled onto her back, and aimed upward just as the Alpha lunged. The blast tore through his mouth and out the back of his skull. He staggered, shrieking, black blood spraying across the ceiling. The pack shrieked in unison, their voices a chorus of rage. But the Alpha didn't fall. His body trembled, head twitching violently, then slowly, impossibly, the wound began to close. Flesh knitted, bone cracked back into place, blood reabsorbed into his skin. His jaw split open wider than before, his teeth doubling in number. He wasn't dying. He was evolving. Stella's blood ran cold. The pack shrieked again, their bodies trembling, convulsing, as though the Alpha's transformation spread through them. Claws elongated, jaws distended, their eyes glowing brighter. They weren't vampires anymore, they were something worse. Jake's broken whisper cut through the noise. Run. Stella. She couldn't. She wouldn't. She raised the shotgun, knowing it was useless, knowing this was the end. The Alpha stepped closer, towering over her, his new mouth stretching into a monstrous grin. And then he spoke. Not in guttural growls. Not in shrieks. But in perfect, broken English. You are the last light, and tonight, we end it. Stella's scream echoed into the endless dark as the pack descended. The last night had come.